next book is this, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I did Google how to say that. That's what Google said, how to pronounce his name. Do not know if it's correct. I just finished this. It's a relatively short book. It only took me, what was it? I have a spreadsheet for this. 4 days to read. Not a huge commitment. Really, it isn't. I think more people should read this book. Sure, the names are difficult to pronounce. That was one of my first struggles with this book. But after you get past part 1, which I thought while reading it was not necessary, very necessary, entirely necessary. It's necessary because it introduces you to the culture that is then attacked in part 2 and basically, like, I don't want to say destroyed because it wasn't destroyed, but it's persecuted in part 3. Because it's a low commitment book, I think more people should read it. I feel like it would be a really good book to read in schools. Sure, it talks about murder and sex and whatnot, but so do a lot of other books that are required in schools. And this one teaches about a different culture. And it shows a lot of things about, what's it called? Missionary work? That's not the right word. It's the only word I can think of. What is the word? Google. I literally Googled up white men pushing religion on other cultures. I don't think that's gonna give me... What is it called when Europeans eating mummies? Why is that the first thing? It doesn't say what the name is. Oh, colonialization. I got it. It talks a lot about colonialization and the effects of colonialization on the cultures that are being taken over. And I think that's super important to talk about, especially in schools. The thing that made me the most angry is the last chapter, chapter 25. And I'm not going to talk about the rest of it because it'll spoil the rest of the book. It'll spoil the whole learning about the culture and whatnot. But there's a white man called the Commissioner who's here to enforce laws of England on these people who are not English. You don't have the right to go to someone else's home and punish them by your rules. They didn't agree to become part of you. They also didn't agree to accept your religion. Why? Makes me upset. However, the thing that made me the most upset in this book was not the white man's audacity. Oh, well, I guess it is. Oh no. No. It's the fact that this commissioner says that he could write almost a whole chapter on the main character of this book. Perhaps not a whole chapter, but a reasonable paragraph at any rate. The audacity of this white man to put the whole of a person's existence into a single paragraph and call it good enough is ridiculous. And that's just, it's ridiculous enough to do for one person, but he's trying to put a whole culture into one paragraph. And it really says a lot about how, I'm going to say Americans because that's the culture that I'm from. I can't really speak for any other culture. How Americans are taught about other cultures. It's a single paragraph in a huge textbook that tells everybody, or everybody who reads it, how great America is in relationship or in relation to other cultures. We're not learning about those other cultures. All we're learning is how much greater we are. And then people are surprised that America is so America first, America the best. The fault is in our education system. The fault is in the fact that these people think that they can put an entire person's existence into a single paragraph and call it good for describing the whole culture. Anyway, this is a good book. It's not very long. I think anybody could read it. The names might be a little bit difficult, but there are plenty of resources online, like audiobooks or whatnot, to help you if the pronunciation of the names and some of the words is that difficult for you. I do recommend this book to anybody who wants to learn a little bit about a different culture, who wants to read something that isn't Eurocentric. I highly recommend this book. And I will see you with the next book. Oh, I didn't even rate it. I give this 5 out of... We're shaking. I didn't even rate this. I'm giving this 5 out of 5 stars. I was a little bored at first. Didn't know why I was reading it. I got to part 2 and I started to realize why I was reading it. I got to part 3 and I was so infuriated that I read it all in one go. It probably would have taken me a little bit longer had I not gotten invested in part 2 the way that I did and just moved on to part 3. So it's a little slow going at first, but once you get to when the plot starts, it's really important. But the beginning part, you can't just skip the beginning part because the beginning part is crucial crucial information for the introduction to the plot. Feels weird at first when you're reading it, but once you get to it, it makes so much sense. It's honestly brilliantly done. I give this a 5 out of 5. Let me know if there's any other books. And on to the next book. Goodbye! I just finished... Ow. Okay, the book's okay. I just finished reading... My chair is sinking. I just finished reading The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This book had me feeling so many emotions. I read it in 2 days. This has been the first book that I've devoured since I finished reading, I think, the Tortall book. This has been, of all the books I've read this year, I think this has been my favorite. To be quite frank, I read it because Jack Edwards suggested it. He rated this 5 stars, 5 out of 5. I also give it a 5 out of 5. This is beautiful. I can read the inside, like my description is not going to do this justice, so I can read the inside of the cover for you. He is a brilliant math professor with a peculiar problem. Ever since a traumatic head injury, he has lived with only 80 minutes of short-term memory. She is an astute young housekeeper with a 10-year-old son who is hired to care for him. And every morning, as the professor and the housekeeper are introduced to each other anew, a strange and beautiful relationship blossoms between them. Though he cannot hold memories for long, his brain is like a tape that begins to erase itself every 80 minutes. The professor's mind is still alive with elegant equations from the past, and the numbers, in all of their articulate order, reveal a sheltering and poetic world to both the housekeeper and her young son. The professor is capable of discovering connections between the simplest of quantities, like the housekeeper's shoe size, and the universe at large, drawing their lives ever closer and more profoundly together, even as his memory slips away. That also doesn't do it justice. This book was so touching. Also, there's a bit about logarithms that I really would have liked to know when I was taking my math class. But chapter 7 was my favorite. Absolutely. I have bookmarked it. I don't like writing in my books, so I use post-it notes, but I didn't have any nice post-it notes, so I had to use huge post-it notes. But chapter 7 was my favorite. I highly recommend it. I don't know if it was done on purpose, but I think it's brilliant that the most essential chapter to the plot was also the largest prime number under 10, and the professor loves prime numbers. I don't know if that was done on purpose. I don't know if I'm seeing things where they really aren't, but I think even if it was a coincidence, it was a lovely one. My favorite passage is on page 116, chapter 7. Eternal truths are ultimately invisible, and you won't find them in material things or natural phenomena, or even in the human emotions. Mathematics, however, can illuminate them, can give them expression. That's beautiful. I realized how much I needed this eternal truth that the professor had described. I needed the sense that this invisible world was now... I realized how much I needed this eternal truth that the professor had described. I needed the sense that this invisible world was somehow propping up the visible one. That this one, true line, extended infinitely, without width or area, confidently piercing through the shadows. Somehow this line would help me find peace. Beautiful. Love it. Also, the end of that chapter, I have another note. This is referring to an equation that the professor wrote down to solve an argument. I still take out that note sometimes and study it. On sleepless nights or lonely evenings, when tears come to my eyes thinking about a friend... I still take out that note sometimes and study it. On sleepless nights or lonely evenings, when tears come to my eyes thinking about friends who are no longer there, I bow my head in gratitude for that one line. The writing itself is gorgeous. Also, props to the translator, because there are quite a few things that are based on the Japanese linguistic system that the translator managed to get across. Does it say who the translator is? But the translator managed to get it across in English, which I think is Stephen Snyder, which I think is really important, especially for something like this, which is where there's like actual plot points based around a specific linguistic system, like syllabic linguistic systems. The fact that he managed to translate it in a way that kept the meaning meaningful is actually really impressive, and props to you, Mr. Snyder, Stephen Snyder. I love this book. It's beautifully written, beautifully translated. The story is not something that I would have ever been brought to if it hadn't been for Jack Edwards recommending it. I also recommend it, even if you know nothing about math. If you just want like a touching story about human connection, then I think this is a good book. It's also very quick. Like I said, I read it in 2 days. It's not a large commitment. It also introduces you to another culture, relatively. Also, there's a lot about baseball in here. I've never been interested in baseball. Somehow I was interested in baseball. I got so attached to all of these characters that it honestly hurt my heart when I had to put the book down. It's just, I think it's a really good book. The story, beautiful. The writing, beautiful. I highly recommend this book. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. You should read it. Also, is this not the most beautiful book you've seen? Like the blue with the cherry blossoms in back here, and you can't see this, but pie is written out along that edge. It's got the, what are they called? The deckled page edges. It's just, the font is beautiful. The beginning of, the beginning of the chapters is well defined and is very pretty. The page numbers are not distracting. Even the little top, this is me nerding out about like how good the design of this book is. But I really like this book. And it's the first book that I read because someone else suggested it, specifically Jack Edwards. He's really the only person that I would take book suggestions from because I feel like we have the same sort of interest in styles. But it's the first book that I've read that was suggested to me, and it tore my heart out. I need to get going. I have other things to do, other books to read. Don't know what I'm reading next, but I'll share it with you when I'm done. Okay, now that I'm back home, we can continue with the book reviews. Also, this is my grandmother. Hello, that's me. That's my mom. Anyways, as you can see, I have books. I have quite a few books. I have maybe, I don't want to say too many books, but I'm running out of space for the books. Do with that information what you will. I have another book review for you. Don Quixote. Now this one's a classic. I do have it in a physical copy, but I don't like that translation. It was skipping parts. Like a lot of parts. And it was free on Amazon, so I got it on the Kindle. So this is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, translated by John Ormsby. I like this translation. I don't know how accurate the translation is, if there are any cultural things that are being missed, but I do know that it's translating the whole thing, meaning that that book was over 1,000 pages long. The only other book I have that's even close to that is this one, Anna Karenina. And this is only like 800 pages, but the 800 fancy pages. That book nearly ended me. Don Quixote nearly ended me. So Don Quixote is about Don Quixote of La Mancha, who is a knight-errant, or sees himself as a knight-errant, and his squire Sancho Panza. And they go out on adventures. Now in part 1, I thought that Don Quixote was a madman, and that Sancho Panza was just a little bit bored with his current life, and maybe just taken in by the whole idea, and then he just got trapped. Because I didn't actually believe Don Quixote's narrative. I believed how everybody else saw Don Quixote, which is kind of as a little bit of a lunatic. And then in part 2, it started getting more fantastical and made me think that maybe Don Quixote is onto something. Maybe he knows something that we don't. And maybe Sancho Panza can see that too. It's nothing like the ballet, and every single translated version that I have read has been different. So I have the hardcover, which it doesn't even have the translator. It's from like the 60s. I have that version, and I have the second version that I didn't like, that also didn't have the translator attached to it, but it was skipping parts. And then I have a condensed version, or what is it, an abbreviated version, and then I have the ballet. All of them are different. I highly recommend this one though. I'm pretty sure it was free. It covers all of the parts. It's very long, but it was fun. It was fun reading it. It's interesting to see how the different stories play out. Each chapter is kind of its own story, and they're just compiled together to make one grand adventure. So I really, really enjoyed that. I would give Don Quixote a 4 out of 5. It's not my book. It's not my favorite book, but I did enjoy it, and I do think it's important literature. There are some parts that are just so bizarre, like comparing a woman to an ermine, the little ferret-like creatures, right? They don't have wings, they have paws. That was weird. That was a weird part. And there's also a whole lot of blatant racism, which you kind of have to address when you read it. Keeping in mind that this book, I think, was written in the 1600s. Let me double check that. Yeah, so it was written in the 1500s, the late 1500s, and then it was published in 1605. So you kind of have to think about the general understanding of the world at that time in Spain, because that's where this was written. That's where it was published. The original publication is in Spanish. So if you can read Spanish, then I highly recommend reading that original version of it. But when you read it in now times, you have to really consider how to interpret and how to take what you're reading and move forward with it, because it is sexist, it is racist, and it's a product of its time, but that doesn't mean that it has to be a product of this time. And you can appreciate the book without appreciating those values. Does that make sense? It's not so infiltrated in the book that it made me not like the book. It just was a little bit disturbing as I was reading it. So fair warning for that. Overall, I enjoyed it. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. And if you have read this book or any of the other books I've talked about in this review, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what you're currently reading or what you want to read. A book you've enjoyed so far. I'm always looking to add to my list because I need more. And I will see you guys next time.